I'm Sam Bear for Class Winners Collector Vehicles, and I'm driving the least desirable Porsche 911 ever produced. And you know what? I don't care what anybody else says. I love this. This thing's great. So this is a 2001 Porsche 911 Carrera. And in terms of how Porsche people refer to it, it's the 996 generation, which came out in 1998. So why do people not love the 996? It's very simple. It was the first totally brand new, no component shared version of the 911 since it first came out in the early 60s. But more importantly, it was the first water-cooled 911. So gone was the traditional air-cooled engine and back, replaced with a 3.4 liter dual overhead cam with variable valve timing, flat six, but it used a traditional radiator. And you know what? It's better in every way. This is a great car. But you know, auto enthusiasts, they gotta have favorites and they gotta have least favorites. But let me tell you something. Being the least desirable Porsche 911 is kind of like being the ugliest Sports Illustrated swimsuit model. I mean, come on. This thing is amazing compared to everything else out there. And I'll prove it to you. All right, let's talk acceleration. Oh my God. Wow. You forget just how fast these cars are. Now, keep in mind, the published time from Porsche, 0 to 62 or 0 to 100 kilometers an hour, was 5.2 seconds. So about 4.9 seconds, 0 to 60. And by modern standards, that's not something that really makes people stand up and notice. But back in the late 90s, early 2000s, that's fast. And it feels like you're being launched out of a cannon. But more importantly, it's about 0.2 of a second faster than the 993 it replaced, the last air-cooled. When you're talking top speed, yeah, like we're gonna explore that on public roads. No, I mean, this thing will do 175 miles an hour. Again, that's faster than the 993 it replaced. The 996 compared to the 993, it's longer, it's wider, it weighs 100 pounds less, it out-handles, out-brakes, and is pretty much faster and more reliable in every way, shape, and form. So it begs the question, why is it the least desirable 911? And it comes down to two reasons. One, it has no air-cooled engine. And that's just basically, folks, a religion. When you're an air-cooled guy, you're an air-cooled guy. The second reason is the front. Specifically, the headlights, or what Road and Track called the fried egg look. And those were shared with the Porsche Boxster. And it's not cool to share a look with a less expensive car. Now for 2002, the 996s got the 911 turbo headlight look. And then people, well, they thought that was much better. Porsche 911s had a reputation for dangerous handling, and it was really unfounded because, honestly, no 911 was ever really dangerous. It's just that it handled like a mid-engine or rear-engine car. When you have pendulum motion back there, you don't want to take your foot off the throttle. Over the generations, they tried to make it better. By the 996, they got it spot on right. The wider track, it's hard to get it wrong in this car because it's so compliant. I mean, it's so much better than any of the 911s that came before it. And here's a test. It's wet out here. Wow. A little bit of shimmy. I mean, it's the first rain we've had in a while, and no understeer, no oversteer, no nothing. It's just planted. And I assure you, you wouldn't have gotten that back in the air-cooled days. The other thing is, the steering feel is totally different from those 70s and 80s Carreras and Targas and SCs. The steering still feels direct, but there's a more weighted, more modern feel to it. And it just feels beautiful. You can still feel it planting down with the engine back there, coming out of the apex. And beyond the handling properties, which make people no longer afraid that they're going to slide off ass end first into a tree, the brakes are also better. Wow, dead straight, absolutely perfect pedal feel, and ABS, because it's a modern car. So another thing about the 996 that really is so much better than previous generations, transmission. This 6-speed shifts so nicely. Now, anybody who has experienced seat time in the older air-cooled generations, you know, the 60s and the 70s and the early 80s, they'll tell you, finding gears is a chore. Not on this. This is a great feel. The throws are the perfect length. It just doesn't get much better. This feels like you could take it to the racetrack right now. You can't bring up a 996 generation Porsche, or a Boxster for that matter, and not talk about the 800-pound elephant, the IMS bearing. So what is the IMS bearing, and why is it an issue when buying a 996? Well, basically, the IMS, or intermediate shaft, is what controls you. It's the chain that connects the camshafts on each side. And the bearing is what locates it. Now, the bearings originally were designed to be lifetime sealed units. But as it turns out, lifetime could be 75,000 miles, it could be 100,000 miles, and some failed even earlier than that. And even though the design of having an intermediate shaft was nothing new to the flat 6, for some reason these bearings failed. And in 996s, people had their engines grenade because these bearings would seize up, the chains would tighten, and camshafts and valves and pistons and kaboom. Now, it's really not that hard to change the IMS bearing, and any Porsche expert does a zillion of them. And guess what? All cars on the road have an Achilles heel. Corvettes, Camaros, Mercedes. So Porsche's no different. And also keep in mind, the IMS bearing was an issue even in the 997s, the early cars. So just make sure the IMS bearing has either been done or it's a low mileage vehicle. So one more note about being the least desirable 911. Keep in mind, the soft window Targas of the late 60s and early 70s. Those are the ones that had like a convertible top-like rear section. There was a long period where you couldn't give those away because they were so not desirable. Nobody wanted them. I saw one go at auction almost 10 years ago for $250,000. You can't touch one for under 100 grand now. And the 911 I used to own, I bought it for $1,000. It was a 1970 911T. That was the Touring, the last of the carbureted air-cooled 911s. The T had carburetors, the E and the highest performance S, those had fuel injection. Nobody wanted the low-tune carburetor version. So I bought that probably about 15 years ago. Yeah, $1,000, had about $4,500 into it in total. Sold it for $9,800 about a year later. And I was dancing because nobody wanted those. And now, 75 grand for one of those. 75 grand. So what's not cool now is going to be cool in the future. And this car, no matter what anybody else says, it's cool. So pick one up while you still can. Sam Bearer for Class Winners Collector Vehicles, reminding you life's too short for ordinary cars, and it's certainly too short to sit there and talk about a really great car as not being desirable. When you actually sit in the car and drive it, you can tell how awesome it is.